I'd like to welcome you all this morning to this event supported by the University Seminars Program of the Onassis Foundation. We have with us this morning Professor Panayotis Tsakonas. He is a professor of international relations, security studies, and foreign policy analysis at the Department of Mediterranean Studies, University of the Aegean, Rhodes, Greece. He studied political science, international relations, and security studies at the Pantheon, University of Athens, and Reading University, Great Britain. He has been a research fellow at the Institute of International Relations, Athens, Greece, NATO Research Fellow, postdoctoral fellow at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University, Fulbright visiting scholar at the Macmillan Center for International Area Studies at Yale University, and academic visitor at St. Antony's College Center for European Studies, University of Oxford. He has worked as Chief International Affairs Analyst for the weekly New Europe, as advisor on defense and strategic issues at the Hellenic Ministry of National Defense, and as special advisor at the Hellenic Ministry of Foreign Affairs on security issues on Greek and Turkish relations. He's a co-director of the book series International European Studies and co-editor of the academic journal Etude Hellenic Studies. We are so very fortunate to have him here with us today. The title of his lecture is Forced Migration in the Mediterranean, Perspectives and Strategies. So please, let's welcome Professor Tsakonas.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Amina, first of all, and Professor Bastea for having me there, for extending this invitation and having me there, here at University of New Mexico. The topic of my presentation is a very timely one. I assume you have all been aware of some of the headlines of the newspapers about the fleeing of refugees towards the Greek islands or some of the Italian islands in the past. And it seems that the phenomenon of refugee crisis or migration crisis is here to stay. And we are very much concerned, particularly in Europe, about how things would evolve in the immediate future. Forced migration refers, first of all, I've got to provide you with a small definition about forced migration. It refers mainly to the movement of refugees or displaced persons, or to people who have been displaced for a number of reasons related to conflict, ethnic strife, environmental disaster, and so on and so forth. So my presentation today is about the phenomenon of forced migration as it is, as it appears in a particular region of the world, the Mediterranean region. I assume most of you are familiar with geographically speaking, of where the Mediterranean is. But for those who are not familiar with it, here is what most analysts consider as the Mediterranean region, with North Africa, countries of Northern Africa on the south, and certain countries of Southern Europe on the north, and of course the part of Turkey and the Middle East. One has to, first of all, highlight the fact that the phenomenon of forced migration has two distinct characteristics and main characteristics regarding two particular realities, I would say. It is an unstoppable phenomenon, first of all, and it is a complicated one. It is an unstoppable phenomenon because the root causes of the forced migration and by consequence of the refugee crisis or migration crisis are there, as I said, are there to stay. And it seems that there are many particular reasons regarding the Mediterranean region in particular which do not augur well for the future. It seems that there is a continuous production of instability in the Mediterranean region for a number of reasons. Some analysts used to say that in Mediterranean applies what Winston Churchill used to say in the past about the Balkans, that the region produces much more instability it can really consume. This is true. The main issue one has to refer to is the fact that climate change, which is a much more global phenomenon, takes place in the Mediterranean region and has certain consequences already for the stability of the area. Here is a map where some of those problems, let's say, mainly regarding water scarcity, are there already, seem to be there already, and the situation will deteriorate in the immediate future. As you can see, there are areas in yellow, and let me use this one. Okay. Here it says areas already under water stress. In yellow and in orange, you can see there are many areas especially in Northern Africa, but also in certain South European states, where this water stress is already high, or it is expected to be very high in the immediate future. Plus the issue of the sea level rise, which seems to here in Egypt, of course in Venice is already there, but there are many places in Northern Africa where sea level rise and water scarcity is already a problem, and it's going to deteriorate in the months and years to come. That's another map where that water scarcity is being depicted with regard to particular, you see, hot spots, where water scarcity is already an issue, plus desertification, which also seems to be a problem for certain states in Northern Africa and Turkey, Middle East and Turkey, as well as in certain places in South European states like Spain or Italy or Greece to much more limited extent. Why is that a problem? That's a problem because climate change used to interlink with conflicts which are already already existing in the area. So it is expected that it will intensify disputes which are already there. It is expected that it would lead to or further strengthen state fragility, degrade human security, and most importantly, function as a kind of a threat multiplier, which, as I pointed here, might create or exacerbate insecurities and tensions from the individual to the international level. As I mentioned, this might account for what has been referred to the refugee crisis as a phenomenon which is as unstoppable, as I said. I have also mentioned it's a phenomenon which is very much complicated because it's part of a much more complicated network of threats, instabilities, and challenges, security challenges in the area, which by all means are already there and which also seem to intensify in the near future. Here is a theoretical model of the Mediterranean security as things stand in early 90s. Things are much more complicated now. You can see that interrelationship and interlinkage between different levels of analysis, the state level and some of the challenges, security challenges arising from at the state level, existing at the state level, like population increase, underdevelopment, pollution, religion radicalism, lack of democracy, which are interlinked with the interstate level threats and challenges, like weapons of mass destruction, the existence of weapons of mass destruction, terrorism, regional conflicts, natural resources, transnational crime, plus the topic of our discussion today, which has to do with the refugees crisis or migration crisis. So that's the most important thing an analyst who should focus on, I think, trying to see the interconnection between different levels of analysis and different threats and challenges existing at those levels. As you can see, this is a very complicated, right, picture of what has been happening in the Mediterranean right now. It can be much more complicated. Here is a diagram of geopolitical relationships in the Middle East, with relationships being depicted in terms of threat relationship, foreign relationship, or uncentered relationships, and this is really hell. This is mess, really. It's not that mess, taking into consideration that Palestine and Israel were discounted for the sake of simplicity, but whatever. It is a very complicated picture of interrelations and interlinkages, right, in the Mediterranean. So, coming back to our topic, our main topic, migration. Here in green, in light green, you can see the immigration countries, and in orange, or something like orange, the countries where migrants are directed to, the recipients, right, of the refugees and migrants, and a circle, a red circle, which refers to the so-called Schengen area. Some of you might be aware of or know what Schengen area is about. Schengen area is a place where, since 1995, when that agreement took place between the European states and some of the non-European members at the time, there is a free movement of people and goods and commodities. As you can see here in blue, in deep blue, these are the members of the Schengen Agreement right now. In light blue, members of Schengen Agreement which are not EU members, like Norway and Iceland. And also in green, candidates for Schengen Agreement. They have already signed the agreement, but they are not still members of the agreement. Romania, Bulgaria, and Croatia, plus 2 members of the European Union, which have not been members of the Schengen Agreement, Ireland and United Kingdom. This map might help you get a better idea as the presentation goes on with regard to the placement of the refugees and to certain rules which are now taking place at the European Union. Coming to the the main point of the presentation, migration pressure on the EU's external borders. There are, as you probably know, many routes from Northern Africa towards and Middle East towards the European Union. These are the main routes. I'll make a more detailed reference to those routes, but these are the major maritime routes, the major land routes from Northern Africa and Middle East to Europe. And what is also important is to have a look at the coastal migration hubs here and there, particularly on the northern Africa. That particular phenomenon of migration crisis, it seems to come to the surface sometime in 2011, 2012, when about 80% of the migrants have been detected at particular EU's external borders, namely the Mediterranean region, and particularly the sea borders of the Mediterranean region. Already since 2013, 70% of detections have taken place at the EU maritime borders. Here are the 5 major migration routes from Northern Africa and Middle East to Europe. As I say here, as I mentioned here, the most traveled ones. Here they are, the Western African one, the Western Mediterranean one in green, the Central Mediterranean one, that's the most important, or seemed to be the most important until 2014, last year, the previous year, the Apulia and Calabria route, and what is now the most important route, migration and refugee route, the Eastern Mediterranean one, meaning from Turkey or through Turkey to Greece and then to the European Union. Here is a more elaborate, let's say, view of what has been happening in 2014, with the Central Mediterranean route being the most, the heaviest, let's say, one, the most traveled one. About a year ago, with the Eastern Mediterranean one following, plus some other land routes appearing on the map, Western Balkans one and the Eastern border one. Here is also a map which tells that the Central Mediterranean route has been the most traveled one the previous year, and the one in the Eastern Mediterranean followed. There are also some numbers on it, but I'll make particular reference to numbers. Here is, I believe, a quite important issue referring to the refugees and migrants arriving by sea in the European Union. You can see here the gradual increase in numbers of refugees from 2010, you see, at around 10,000 people, to more than 200,000 people in 2014, and within the first 6 months of 2015, at around 150,000 people. It seems that around 350,000 people have already passed within the first 8 months of 2015 through the Eastern Mediterranean route to Europe. But I'll come to that. Here is a reference to certain changes that have occurred since 2000. There have been changes in the routes from the western route to central route to eastern route. Here is a diagram that makes clear that acknowledgement. There are also there is also a further increase in 2009 and 2010 in Greece's land borders. In 2012, when Greece attempted to control the rising number of land crossings by building a security fence, the pressure moved to the sea. So you can see here the land crossings from, you see, how the increase in land crossings from 2010 to 2012, and then the increase in sea crossings from 2012 up to now, to 2014 and up to now. Here is a more clear picture of what had happened over the last 8 months. In 2015, refugees and migrants crossing the Mediterranean exceeded 300,000 people. Almost 200,000 people were landing in Greece, and about 100,000 people in Italy. Here you can see the increase in the number of migrants and refugees landing in Greek islands. It's really amazing, from about 1,000 people in January to 100,000 people in August. If one tries to explain that changes the migrant routes, there is an umbrella, let's say, conclusion one can make about the better management of migration by individual states' actions. And this is true, especially concerning Italy, which seemed to it seems it had managed to better organize itself, and with regard to border management control, as well as with regard to bilateral agreements Italy signed by certain North African states like Morocco, for example, or Libya. Another explanation is that there has been also multilateral agreements signed between the European Union as a whole and countries of origin, like the mobility partnership between the European Union and Morocco. So it seems that some of those multilateral agreements did work, while others did not. For example, there has also been a repatriation agreement signed between the European Union and Turkey, which did not work for a number of reasons, and I'll come to that in a minute. One might also consider whether that journey is, why is it important to focus on the Mediterranean, and does it matter? It does. These are dangerous and fatal journeys taking place from the coast of Africa to certain Italian islands, or Italy, Italian land, or Greek islands, or the Greek land. Here is, you can get here an idea about the migrant deaths the previous year. You see the Mediterranean region is leading the way, where deaths in other regions of the world, like the Bay of Bengal, US-Mexico border, Horn of Africa, East Africa, are much, much, much lower. So the loss of human lives is still very high. There's a gradual increase in loss of human lives from 2007 to 2015. It mainly took place in the region between the coast of certain hotspots in the northern part of Africa, particularly Libya, and Italy. So between Italy or Sicily, more specifically, and Libya, it seems that most incidents is the place where most incidents have occurred along that route. Here is more or less, it says more or less about what has already been said. That map tries to depict the roots of the particular roots and relate particular roots with loss of human lives or death tolls. So what is important to mention is, based on what has already been said, what we are speaking about is not actually a migration crisis or solely a migration crisis. It seems that things have changed or have moved from a migration crisis to mainly a refugee crisis, not solely a refugee crisis by all means, but is mostly a refugee crisis, what is now taking place. Why is that? Because the main problem, the main source, if I may say so, of the refugees is Syria and the crisis in Syria. Here are certain countries surrounding Syriza. No, it's not Syriza, it's Syria. Okay, sorry about that. Syriza is the leading party in Greece, political party. So you can understand. Anyway, so Turkey, Lebanon, Pakistan, Iran, Ethiopia, Chad, Jordan, particularly Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan seem to be the neighboring countries which are now hosting refugees, Syrian refugees. Here you can also get an idea. I have already described that flows, those flows of refugees, but you can get an idea about, you see, the Eastern Mediterranean route, it's about people coming from Syria, Afghanistan, and Somalia, right? While the Central Mediterranean route regards mainly people from Syria, Eritrea, Sub-Saharan Africa. Syria, people from Syria are always there and always lead the way. And I mentioned refugee hosting countries where refugee camps exist in Jordan, Lebanon, or Turkey, right? But it's one thing to have an abstract view about how that might look like, and get a better idea about how that is really looking like. Here is an aerial view of the Zatri refugee camp in Jordan, where about 1 million people, about 1 million refugees are being hosted. I don't know whether that. Okay.
As a result of the Syrian civil war, Lebanon has the highest concentration of refugees of any country in the world. Its population is just under 4.5 million people, but more than 1 million Syrians have fled here. Neighbouring Jordan has also had a huge influx. The government has been praised for its efforts to take Syrians in, but it says the true number of refugees is much higher than the official total. Egypt itself has suffered from instability as a result of the Arab Spring, but it too has found more than 100,000 Syrians crossing its borders. The same is true of Iraq. As in Syria, huge parts of the country are controlled by the self-styled Islamic State, but almost 250,000 Syrians have crossed the border here too. But Turkey has seen the biggest influx of all. By the end of the year, the number of Syrians who fled could well hit 2 million. In the past 4 years, the total number of people who left Syria to escape the conflict now stands at almost 4 million. That's out of a population of 22 million in 2011.
That was very telling, I assume, right, about the refugee hosting neighboring countries, here you can also get an idea about what has already been said about the refugee camps. Almost 2 million people in Turkey, almost 8 million internally displaced in Syria, about 700,000 people, refugees in Jordan, and more than 1 million in Lebanon. So you can easily understand that the main nationality of migrants for the time being is Syrian one, although people from Afghanistan, Somalia, and Eritrea are also parts, I would say, of that flow of refugees, although there have been fluctuations in starting from 2009 to 2013 in the numbers of migrants coming from Syria, which now seem to lead the way in terms of nationality. Here is also another map, another diagram, but who is the leading nationality of refugees? Here you can get an idea about the follow-up routes, I would say, of the migrants going from the Middle East or North Africa to Italy and Greece, either through the eastern route or the central route, and then what you might consider. They will go to certain EU states which seem to be the most attractive ones in terms of asylum applications. Germany, Sweden, and France. They have to follow certain ways, channels by all means, through particular countries in Central and Eastern Europe. They usually, what we call Eastern Balkan route, refers to people which use Turkey as a transit country and then move either through Greece or Bulgaria. They move towards the Central Europe through Serbia and then Hungary, further up to Germany and Sweden. These are a much clearer, I think, view of the routes from South to Central and North Europe. You see again, people from Greece either moving to Albania or through Kosovo and Serbia to Hungary and then further north. That's about the same. Here's the same argument depicted on a different way. People from Turkey, Greece, through Macedonia, or former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Serbia, and then to Hungary or Austria, further up to Germany. Most of them seem to be trapped in Hungary, at least in 2015, this year. Around 160,000 100 migrants have been detained in Hungary. Hungary has also proceeded with the erection of a fence on its border with Serbia, a fence of about 200 kilometers long. Most of the refugees asking for an asylum in Hungary do not receive it. Hungary has second thoughts about refugees. Only 4 or 5% of the applications, of the asylum applications, are being approved. So the refugees still try to find their way to, as I said, the most attractive asylum countries of the European Union: Germany, Sweden, and France to a certain extent. This is This is asylum seekers to the European Union. Germany leads the way, Sweden follows, Italy, France, Hungary, and most of those seeking for asylum are people from Syria, followed by people from Eritrea and Afghanistan, and also Mali, Nigeria, Somalia, and so on. From January to July of the previous year, you get a comparative view here. From January to July of this year, around 500,000 people have submitted asylum applications, compared to almost a half of that number in the previous year. Most of those asylum applications have been directed towards Germany, as you can see, at around 200,000 applications, with Hungary following, and Sweden and France and Switzerland. Most of the applications are from people from Syria, at around 40,000 applications are directed towards Germany, Serbia and Kosovo, and then Hungary, Sweden, Austria, Bulgaria, and some other countries, the European Union. One might wonder what is the role played by the most important transit country in the region, that is Turkey, with regard to the migration control of the refugees, which would like to trespass Turkey and go further up to first to Greece and then to Northern Europe. It seems that Turkey's migration control policy has not been very helpful so far. How we know that? There are three or at least two reasons one can come up with that kind of conclusion. Is first of all, there has been a readmission agreement with Greece already since 2001. Turkey has not been very supportive with regard to that readmission agreement. Here is a very good example about how we know it has not been very supportive. Within 8 or 9 years, from 2002 to 2010, Greece addressed about 70,000 readmission requests to Turkey for people, for migrants that had to be readmitted, that had to be sent back to their countries of origins. And Turkey has admitted around 70,000 of those requests, and it had eventually delivered less than 1,500 applications. Number two, there is a readmission agreement with the European Union. It was signed in 2013. It was supposed to take place after 3 years, to be at work after 3 years of the signing. So it does not provide for a direct, immediate, or a viable solution to the refugee crisis problem. Why is that? Because it is still conditional on a trade-off between Turkey and the European Union. Turkey says to the European Union, you've got to give, it's a kind of give and take thing. You're going to give me the visa liberalization for Turkish citizens, and I will, in return, give you or provide you with the readmission obligations, including this agreement. So at present, there is no readmission of nationals from countries Turkey has not signed bilateral agreements with, and there are many of those countries of origins where people start that risky journey to the European Union. And last but not least, it seems that there is also an issue which is related to Turkey's EU accession process. You probably know that Turkey has already started negotiations agreements with the European Union for becoming a full member of the European Union already since 2005. That agreement is there, and negotiations have started already since 2005, but the whole thing has now frozen, right? Negotiations not taking place for a number of reasons. So in case there is a kind of a revitalization of that accession process, EU accession process between Turkey and the European Union, which is now on hold, there might be a kind of unfreezing, if I may say so, of a particular chapter related to Turkey's obligation to readmit people from certain countries of origin. That is chapter 24. It refers to freedom and justice and security, which is frozen, as I said. So it seems that for as long as the accession process of Turkey is on hold, nothing can really happen. Turkey cannot be helpful on that issue. Okay, and that's the last part of my presentation, dealing with illegal migration. As I said, it's an unstoppable phenomenon, and it's a very complicated one. And as a modern philosopher and sociologist, American, used to say, there is, the phrase goes like that. I think he said there is always a simple answer to a complex problem, and it is always wrong. Number two, people who are far from the problem seem to have the right recipe all the time. I found that cartoon with an American having a look at the TV set, and where, you know, it said crisis in the Mediterranean, mass drownings, and the guy says, those poor African migrants drowning. Why don't the Europeans let them in? It seems not to be as easy as it might think, the guy that might think it is. And here I will try to very briefly explain why the European Union did not manage so far to be successful in dealing with the migration issue or the refugee crisis, what most of the EU leaders refer to as the most important crisis the European Union faced since the end of the World War II. Okay, I would suggest there are two. The main problem has to do with the way the European Union perceives the problem on the one hand, and the way the European Union implements decisions taken for dealing with the problem on the other hand. Meaning that there is a European discourse about the issue, which since the end of the Cold War, since early 90s, up to 2014, probably up to now, it has been perceived, migration has been perceived and approached as a threat. And this is how the so-called Fortress Europe, the idea of Fortress Europe has been created. So by implication, the European Union, in terms of the way it perceives the problem and how that particular European discourse is being constructed, migration and border policing have been securitized. In terms of action, meaning in terms of policies on paper, what the European Union had decided, and those decisions have been incorporated in certain documents of the European Union, be they documents of the European Council decisions, conclusions of the European Council, or other organs of the European Union, like the European Commission, for example, or the European Parliament. There are policies on paper on the one hand, and and those policies had to be implemented, right? So in the short term and in the medium term, the European Union has attempted to deal with the problem in two different ways. One is the short-term one, and the other is the medium or long-term one. First of all, the European Union tried to manage that pressure on its external borders, right? And to a certain extent deter that pressure on its external borders, send them away, or make them think twice to approach the European Union in terms of deterrence. There have been many instruments at European Union's disposal for doing that. Frontex is the most known one. Is a kind of a military force. It's a force by all means. It's not military in terms of, you know, the type of weapons it carries. It mainly monitors what has been happening on EU's external borders. So it does not carry any deterrent ability. And there are also some other agencies and organs within the European Union for dealing with the migration problems, particularly in terms of information gathering and also the information gathering, information assessment, rather than taking particular measures for deterring those migration flows. There are also certain national instruments in the hands of the nation states, the member states of the European Union. Particular members of the European Union, Italy, Greece, Spain, have taken measures for dealing with the migration flows in their borders. For example, there have been operations like the most known one, Mare Nostrum, in Italy's borders, or Greece has built a fence on its northern part in an area called Evros. And there have been also some other measures taken at the national level. Okay, that's about the short-term deterrence and management of EU external borders. In the medium and long term, the European Union has also tried to do two things. To externalize its instruments, its European instruments and policies with regard to two particular issues: security on the one hand and development on the other. Meaning that the European Union have also tried in the medium and long term to deal with the problem by revitalizing some of its instruments, right? Some of them are referring to security, some others are referring to development. Some of them are related to initiatives that have already been taken within the European Union, like, for example, the European Union attempt to develop an autonomous foreign and security policy called ESDP, European Security Defense Policy. That's an instrument in the hands of the European Union, which has been linked to the migration issue. And on the other hand, trying to address the root causes of the problems, which seem to be related mainly, that's the European idea of helping those countries, or countries of origins, by providing them with aid, with economic aid, for development, by also revitalizing some other European Union institutional initiatives, like, for example, an institutional initiative called European Neighborhood Policy. You have probably heard about it. Or the most recent attempt of the European Union called the Union for the Mediterranean, which is another institutional initiative taken by the European Union since 2008. What's the effects on EU's policy efficacy? I would say there are effects on EU's policy inefficacy. The European Union has not been effective in dealing with the migration crisis, taking into account or taking into consideration what are the instruments at its disposal, how it used them, and to what extent it had managed to relate them with the migration crisis. So these are four different conclusions. Number one, the European Union has been partly effective with regard to border management, to the management of its borders. There are two reasons for that: lack of solidarity among member states, and the limits of what I mentioned before, the limits of the instrument the European Union has at each hand, called European Security and Defence Policy, ESDP. Those limits had to do with the lack of the use of force on the part of the European Union. European Union is an entity, it's not a state, right? The use of force is not there as an option, not even as a last resort for dealing with external threats. You've got to take that into consideration, probably from an American point of view, as a limit of the European Union to use the force it has at its disposal. Number two, a lack of implementation of agreements signed between the European Union and neighboring countries. And the second conclusion is there's a kind of a gap between that tough talk objectives, meaning the securitization approach of the European Union. The issue of the migration crisis has been considered as a threat, right? So the whole issue has been securitized. That led to a tough talk about the migration issue and how it should be dealt. It should be someone has to deal with it. On the other hand, you've got soft action, which is also ill-defined. So there is a gap between a tough talk on the one hand and ill-defined and soft action on the other, which is mainly related to the what most analysts call the capabilities realities gap. The third conclusion, voluntary versus compulsory solidarity. Solidarity is there. It seems to be the integral part of the European project, right? But at the same time, it has to be defined or redefined in different terms because of the migration crisis. What kind of solidarity is this? We came up with two definitions of solidarity, a voluntary one and a compulsory one. And it seems that for now there is a divergence in EU members' interests between that voluntary and compulsory solidarity. Compulsory solidarity relates to the so-called quota system. I'll talk about it in a minute. And last but not least, the most important European institutional initiative so far, called the European Neighbourhood Policy, ENP, seemed quite unfit to address the complex phenomenon of the refugee crisis. So the European Union has to confront the tragedy that is taking place in the Mediterranean. And there is that old saying, which I found very, very interesting, about the pessimists, the optimists, and the realists or pragmatists. It seems that the European Union is now heading toward a more pragmatist approach. Instead of complaining about the wind or expecting it to change trying to adjust the sails. And there have been two particular reasons for the European Union to start adjusting the sails. There were two wake-up calls. I call them wake-up calls. The first wake-up call for lethargic Europe came in March 2015, when there was a boat of the Libya coast capsized. About 1,000 people. That was a terrible accident. The European Union woke up in a way, woke up and European leaders started talking about the particular accident, and through that particular accident about the refugee crisis, which is now mounting, and we have to do something about it. So within 4 months, only 4 months, the European Union had managed to do what has not been achieved within the last 15 years or so, meaning that wake-up call meant that from March to May 2015 of that year, there have been several decisions made by the European Union, from the EU Council to the EU Commission to EU Parliament. Everybody was there for offering, ideas and solutions, and decisions were made. Here are the most important ones concluded by the European Commission. 10 points for immediate action by the High Representative of Foreign and Security Policy, Federica Mogherini, and the Commissioner on Migration. There is a Commissioner on Migration in the European Union. He's Greek, Dimitris Avramopoulos. There have been some other decisions taken by the EU Council. There's also a new European agenda on security. These are big things and quite new things for the European Union. And also European agenda on migration. Unfortunately, they all proved again ineffective and inadequate for a number of reasons. These are the two main reasons regarding the EU Council decisions. The Council decided for the use of force against smuggling rings in Northern Africa. Hard to achieve it. Ill-defined and hard to achieve it. Also, a redistribution of asylum seekers, which is now the most important thing within the European Union. These agreements have already been there since the announcement of that quota system, that asylum system. These agreements coming from Great Britain, Denmark, Latvia, and followed by certain states in Central Europe and Eastern Europe, particularly Slovakia and Hungary. There is also a strong opposition to the recommendations by the EU Commission in June 2015 about that need for a burden sharing within the European Union, so as to relax, let's say, that pressure on particular countries of the European Union, like Italy, Greece, and Malta. There was a proposal for 40,000 people to be redistributed within the European Union, within certain parts of the countries of the European Union, along particular criteria called quotas criteria or distribution keys, which had to do with the population of the receiving countries, the economic strength of those countries who would accept refugees, or the number of refugees which those countries have already accepted in the past. So there was a kind of a compulsory, right? The initiation of a kind of a compulsory solidarity within the European Union, proposed by the European Commission, particularly the head of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. But there was a big no a very big no on that compulsory solidarity proposed by the European Commission to those mandatory, I would say, quotas. And the result, of course, has been that the European Union have proved unable to share 40,000 refugees, mainly from Syria and Eritrea. And the second wake-up call came a month ago when the European Union realized that things can still get even worse with the Mediterranean tragedy. You see, that's a proof that things can always get worse, right? That was the picture, that was the situation the European Union has to face a month ago. About, I mentioned that before, it's now, the number is much bigger, about 300,000 people arriving in Greece, right? 3,000 expected to enter Macedonia per day. 90,000 have passed through Serbia since January. 80,000 asylum applications expected in Austria. 800,000 asylum applications expected in Germany in 2015. A nightmare. So, fortunately, it seems that there has been a change in the hearts and minds of at least the stronger or strongest countries of the European Union, member states of the European Union, that is Germany and France. And there have been steps taken by the European Union, by Germany, I'm sorry, very generous, I would say, steps towards for dealing with the refugee problem. Germany decided to suspend deporting asylum seekers from Syria under the EU's controversial Dublin regulation. You should know what Dublin regulation is about. It's very important to know what the existing regulation about migrants suggests. It suggests that migrants can only apply for asylum in the first EU member state they enter and face deportation if they try to apply in another. That's very important. If they come to Greece or Italy and ask for an asylum, if they don't get one, they cannot go further up and reapply for an asylum. They had to send back to the country of the first entry, send back to Italy, send back to Greece. So there is already there a kind of an unfair, I would say, agreement called Dublin regulation, and at the same time there is a much more general, I would say, agreement that the Dublin regulation has to change. The sooner the better. So Germany has already decided to process applications from refugees even if they have made their way through other EU countries. That was very important. And also the French President Hollande, along with Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, made statements regarding the need on the part of all EU member states to deal with the problem by accepting what has been called a compulsory solidarity. And that was there has been a meeting yesterday in Brussels of the ministers of called Home and Justice Affairs to discuss about the problem and mainly convince those states which have second thoughts about that compulsory solidarity to accept those quotas proposed by the EU Commissioner. There has also been a proposal made by the European Council to raise to increase the number, to distribute at least 100,000 migrants across the European Union, and also proposal by the European Commission to relocate more than 150,000 asylum seekers within the European Union. It seems that there has not been an agreement, and there was again a postponement of a decision about what should happen for the next meeting of the Ministers of Home and Justice Affairs about to take place about the beginning of October or something like that. So there was a kind of buy time, let's say, on the part of the European Union, instead of dealing with the problem, instead of having most of the or all of the European Union states agree on that compulsory solidarity. And that the last thing I have to present, it's about what is ahead of us and what the European Union can do in the short term and in the medium term. What is most important at the operational, let's say, level in the short term is for the European Union to manage to process the numbers arriving. That's a very important thing. Greece and Italy has to take up on that and try to deal with the problem. So the European Union should help both Greece and Italy to strengthen their capacity issues so as to process the numbers of refugees arriving. Number two, this is also very important, identify those people who are in need of protection, called the refugees, with those who are economic migrants, trying to flee poverty. And third, draft a list of countries deemed safe enough that their citizens would not be eligible for asylum. Meaning what? Meaning that there have been countries like Kosovo or Serbia, or countries which had appeared after the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia, when the war was there 15 years ago or 10 years ago, asking or submitting application for asylum. This cannot be done. The European Union cannot deal with people coming from countries which should be considered as safe countries, not anymore as societies or countries where conflict is there, is everyday life. And also a number of institutional, that is short and medium term measures, which had to do with, I have already mentioned the first two, a fair distribution of refugees through a compulsory quota scheme, a common asylum system, which is not there in the European Union, and it presupposes the change of the Dublin II agreement. And what I found very, very interesting, the third and the fourth point, create sanitary zones in the major refugee hosting countries. Think, for example, of Turkey, right? People, refugees in Turkey, where 1 million, 2 million people waiting in Turkey to pass towards Greece, right? They should have in advance the ability to submit their an asylum application to the European Union, and that asylum application can be assessed by number 4 point, an EU Migration, Asylum and Protection Agency, so as to have centralized EU-wide decisions and manage to more effectively planned and in a much more orderly way have arrivals from those countries. Think of that system in terms of international relations theory, in case you are some of you are interested in that as a kind of an extended migration management, right? As a way of find the right channels to have those peoples outside the EU borders to apply for asylum in the European Union or to a EU Migration, Asylum and Protection Agency, a central one located in Brussels or somewhere in the European Union, which would have the ability to assess those asylum applications in advance, and so in a much more orderly way manage to plan for the arrivals. And last but not least, but that's more of a wishful thinking in terms of what kind of results it can produce, increase humanitarian aid in the countries of origin. And that's it. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for our speaker? Now the time to ask.
I'm sorry, I spoke too. That was a too long presentation. Okay. Yeah.
Would you mind terribly sending that? Could we have access? I would love to see this one.
Yes, by all means. Of course. Yeah, sure.
At the very beginning, you mentioned root causes, and I'm wondering, I didn't see any of that in the rest of the presentation as far as root causes in Syria, for example. How do we address the war, violence, conflict, and stop the flow of migration?
Well, that's an obvious question. By all means, I'm afraid it's beyond the goals, I would say, of that presentation. Particularly the Syrian crisis. You mentioned the Syrian crisis. Of course, that's the root cause for now. It presupposes the involvement of a number of external powers who are already there. The fact that they are involved in the conflict seems to, I would say, to contribute in the conflict in not such a productive way so far. So an answer to that question presupposes that the two main powers, United States on the one hand and Russia on the other, had to collaborate to a certain extent with the European Union and try to find out a way out of the Syrian crisis. But a solution or a management of the Syrian crisis, which is already there since 2011, right? You know that, since January 2011, and which it looks like that there is no real way out. It presupposes the productive involvement of many other elements, many other powers, many other countries besides the European Union, and what the European Union can do for dealing with the root cause of the migration crisis. You're right, it's the root cause, but it takes much more than the European Union to have a way out of a crisis.
Georgia?
I was wondering if you could touch on, you said trying to separate economic migrants from refugees and refugees in violence, and that gets a little sticky, doesn't it? Like it's a little where economic migrants could also be fleeing from violence, or the violence not being able to, stay in their country, or structural violence versus, I guess physical violence.
Well, it's not that sticky. Actually, there are many ways one can distinguish between economic migrants and refugees. There are many ways. Greece, Italy, and the European Union itself, based on what has been not only agreed between the countries of origin and the European Union, but international law in general, it provides the necessary basis for dealing with that kind of problems. So we can indeed distinguish between refugees and economic migrants. The problem seems to be it relates with a third category of migrants, which I would say in the United States is a kind of a common sense when one refers to that. In Greece, Italy, or Europe, it's not that common sense. It has to do with the participation or appearance of jihadists or terrorists within those migration flows, and it is a big issue how one can distinguish between that third category and the other two I mentioned. There's a big question mark there.
So, in the beginning of your presentation, you talked about climate control being a threat. And I think one of the things, would you agree that one of the things that people forgot in terms of the Syrian crisis has been the issue of climate control, desertification, of water. It's moved a lot of people out of the rural areas into the cities and caused a lot of other animosity.
Absolutely right. Yeah, thank you for that remark. Yeah, that was that's very true. That part of what has been happening in Syria now started as an issue for climate change within Syria. Yeah, thank you.